Hi there, I'm Lily and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm a knitwear designer, go by lilykate makes on Instagram and Ravelry and all the places, and I thought it'd be nice to do a little bit of a different kind of video for today. So this week my Checkerplate Sweater pattern was my first pattern release of 2025. Very excited about it. It's nice to have something new and fresh out there in January, and I have mentioned this in my everything I knit in 2024 roundup video recently, but I was kind of trying to rattle through them quite quickly there because there are a lot of projects to go through. And when I've been chatting to my test knitters about their feedback on things, and I've had a few people message me in the lead up to the pattern coming out, asking about yarn suggestions and that kind of thing, I thought it might be quite nice to, rather than trying to write everything out in a Ravelry description or in an Instagram post where A, it would get a bit long and wordy, and B, sometimes things are a bit difficult to explain in the written word. I thought it might be quite nice to do a full video just talking about this one particular item, and maybe kind of start that as a thing that I'm going to do this year, do a bit of a deep dive into each specific item, so that if you're thinking about making this, or you've maybe bought the pattern or considering doing so, it's a video to watch through where I'll talk about the construction, the yarn choice and suggested yarns or things to yarn characteristics to look for, advice with choosing a size, all that kind of thing that will be relevant to this sweater, but probably kind of just generally useful information that would hopefully apply to other items, either of mine or other designers too. So hopefully it'll be a generally useful video. I'm not sure quite how long this will be. I've written myself some notes and some bullet points based on things that I discussed with test knitters or just things that came up, so let's get started. So the Checkerplate sweater, named after this texture, which I'm not sure how well it'll be showing up on camera here. It shows up a lot better when I turn to the side, but I'm facing a window here, so kind of in the worst spot to show it off. But it is inspired by metal checkerplate flooring after my friend Naomi inadvertently dyed her different project with this pattern. It was a bit of a funny story where she dyed it by accident on the back of a truck. So she very kindly recounted the whole story in her hilarious, witty tone, and is included as a little extra with the pattern. You get the pattern and Naomi's short story with it. It's an all-over textured sweater that uses twisted stitches rather than cables to create the texture. So they're just one stitch crossing over another, which technically you could do with cables. But in this case, I use a twisted stitch technique where you basically, the principle of it is that you knit into the second stitch on the needle first and then knit the first stitch. It's kind of like a funky knit two together or SSK that you do, depending whether you're switching them right or left. And obviously throughout the body of this, we have some going right and some going left. So that's the basic principle anyway. And I had wanted to do something with this kind of texture and then did a few swatches and thought that it would work really well with a raglan line, which I have done quite a few raglans, but it's not always my go-to technique. I sometimes do a drop shoulder or a set-in. It's not my default, put it that way, but I think in this case it was going to work perfectly with the stitch pattern. So I'll film some closer clips so hopefully you'll be able to see this, but essentially, because it just lines up really nicely with the basic increase rate of a standard raglan, I thought that would be really nice around the shoulders and around the neck, and I managed to also make the neck shaping line up nicely with the diamonds here too. So the section that frames your face is always lined up with the raglan, and then further down the yoke, kind of in this bit where it's not quite as obvious, for different sizes we have different increase rates. And obviously I kind of had to make a choice between either everything's going to line up perfectly with the raglans, but that means it's the same proportions across the size range, which is not how human bodies work, or there will be some deviation from that exact alignment, and some will have slightly more increases or slightly fewer increases. So I decided that the fit was more important than having it align perfectly just for the sake of it. I thought as long as it aligns for the first section of the yoke that frames your face, that's the most important thing. And then beyond there, different sizes have different increase rates and everything is charted. So there are quite a lot of charts in this pattern. I will warn you of that. If you absolutely despise charts with every fibre of your being, then I apologise, but it was going to get very unwieldy if I tried to do it any other way, because as the stitch pattern is a fairly large repeat, not huge, but reasonably large, I didn't want to just say increase in pattern. I think that leaves a lot of room for interpretation or misinterpretation or confusion, and I knew I'd have people asking me like, oh, how should I do this? And even if you tried to explain like, well, if you have this many stitches, do this, and sort of set up formulas for it, I feel like that in itself can be more confusing. So I thought, you know what, it's going to be best if each size just has a chart, basically, for how to incorporate those extra stitches, whether you be increasing every second row or every fourth or every one row, whatever it may be, because there's different increase rates on the body and the sleeve as well. So it shows you exactly, well, on this row you need to increase, then knit two, then left twist, or whatever it may be. So it's like there's no room for interpretation or knowing whether you should or shouldn't do an increase, a twist or an increase, whatever it may be. And I think hopefully that was helpful. My test has said that was preferable to just having it written out with sort of generic instructions of increase in pattern, where they would have to do a lot more thinking. Yes, you have to pay attention, but the thinking is done for you. You just need to like keep track of where you are, basically, because I did sort of follow a guess formulas when I was like charting it myself of, if I could fit in a repeat, I would do, or if I could fit in a twist, I would do, with a few exceptions. Like, I know one that I was asked about was, why there would be a twist could fit here, so why isn't there one? And sometimes I would maybe omit them, because if there's a section where there's lots of increases back to back, say for a size that has a more rapid increase rate at the underarm, then when you stack a lot of increases, that's a lot of kind of pinching of the fabric, and therefore adding more twists to a section where they're not going to be that visible anyway, I think would add more sort of strain on the fabric than is necessary. And so I kind of made a judgment call on some places to forgo the twist, even though one might technically fit in, because I think it would be a neater, smoother fabric without it. Maybe this won't be as short a video as I imagined. I can ramble on about these things for a while, but yeah, there's a lot of thought went into it, and it took a while, as I'm sure you can imagine, to do all those charts. There are two different charts for the body, depending which side you're working, where your beginning of round falls, but the body is just worked straight, so there's no more shaping to deal with once you reach that point. But the sleeves, because again, they have different decrease rates throughout the size range, I didn't want to just say decrease every 8th round following pattern or something like that. There is like just a full page chart for each size. Again, I thought that would be better than, I know sometimes it's done in books or in like more traditional patterns where there's a massive chart and then there's like lines on it for your size, so you just kind of be like, oh, mine starts and finishes there. But again, that didn't then leave room to use the judgment and kind of be like, well, on that size I might actually omit that twist, or that one I might fit that one in. So I thought, you know what, just do each separate one, so you only have to look at one page. You can, obviously it's a long document, but say you're making a size 3, then there's 8 other pages that you don't need to print for all the other 8 sizes. So once you actually narrow it down, it's not super long. But yeah, that's kind of how the pattern works. You begin obviously at the top here. The neckband is picked up and worked separately. I'll more on that later, about the neckband. But you start at the very top edge, work back and forth for a little while. I did contemplate using short rows for here, but I think it worked out better in this particular pattern to cast on and increase at these edges, working back and forth. With a little nifty method for moving the beginning of round, so when you've been working back and forth and your started row is here, and then when you cast on stitches in the centre to join in the round, but you want the beginning of round to then be here, there's a little trick in there for doing that doesn't involve any breaking yarn or any slipping stitches or anything like that. That just means that you can switch your starting point and be ready to go, and everything's all lined up perfectly. So I was quite happy with that, how that all turned out. But yeah, then it's just worked in the round down to the hem. And then obviously there is a split hem detail that I have included on mine. A few of the testers decided to forgo that and just do a regular ribbed hem. One was doing it for her husband and he preferred that. Another couple of people just wanted it, or were using a yarn that was quite fragile and therefore didn't want to put like an area of strain there. But anyway, that's just like 1x1 rib, quite simple. The neckband is another thing that I wanted to talk about. So I used quite a rustic yarn, so I didn't want the neck to be, I mean, my tolerance to woolly wools is quite high. I can wear carpet and don't care, but like I didn't want the neck to be super tight. Like I do like a turtleneck and other things, but this, if I try and pinch it there to imagine a turtleneck, that wasn't the vibe I wanted for this. I wanted it to like come up, a mock neck I guess you call it, but like stand away from the neck a little bit there. And then there was some chat about this in the Slack chat with Tessa, to the people saying, is it supposed to be like this, or it's a bit looser than I thought, or just, you know, just discussing it. And I think what we kind of established is that the neck needs to be knit at quite a firm rib. So personally, I knit the body on a 4.5mm needle and then did all the ribbed edgings on a 4mm. However, for working the twisty stitch pattern, I was knitting sort of how I regularly would, maybe slightly on the loose side, just to make the twist a bit easier on my hands. I certainly wasn't knitting tight anyway, put it that way. And then for the edgings, I always find that rib looks neatest for me when I do knit super tight. I find I get a neater result by knitting tighter on one needle than I would, like, yes, I could use a smaller needle and then knit looser, but I don't find it's as regular. So I tend to like wrap the yarn twice around my hand and it's all like super tight. And I find that produces the neatest results. So I'd put to use a 4.5mm and a 4 in the pattern, and then a few people were finding that the neckband looked a little bit loose. So with lots of discussion, what we established is that didn't want to put any decreases in or anything like that, because A, it would kind of, they'd be quite visible, and B, it's not supposed to be a tight neck, especially in a more rustic yarn. It's, you know, that's just not the design. It's supposed to have a little bit of room there, but you may need to drop down quite a lot of needle sizes depending on personal tension and yarn choice. So a few of the people that used this yarn but didn't particularly like knitting tightly dropped to like a 3.5 and then a 3mm needle for the neckband, for example, just to make sure that it has that structure, because it doesn't sit like, it's not like the neck starts super wide, it's not like down here or anything, but it's a relatively wide point on the shoulders where the neck starts. So you need to make sure that rib properly, you know, does what rib does best and just cinches right in. Yeah, so, and then people that used a much softer drapier yarn, like one of my testers used an alpaca, which looked beautiful. The pattern becomes a little bit more subtle, the texture in a fluffy yarn, but I mean, obviously that's going to happen. And it looked really nice. The collar actually had then like a little bit of drape to it almost. And it was just, that was lovely in its own different way, a completely different fabric. But yeah, generally, I think so that's a point to note. To make sure that the rib knits up pretty snugly. And so I recommended just putting a lifeline every now and then and trying it on, seeing how you're getting on. And if need be, dropping needle sizes until you get like a really nice firm rib, which for some people might be a 4, some people might need to go to a 3, and it's just like one of those things that is going to depend on the knitter, and you know your hands and your needles and your yarn best. So I used tubular edges for all of my rib cast-offs, which is obviously the hem, the neckline and the cuffs. I love a tubular edge. In most cases I do find it to be the neatest option. Not always. Sometimes in certain yarns it can look a bit messy, but I did like it in this instance. But again, that's one that we found, if you do your tubular bind-offs nice and firm and tight, like I tend to, that it worked. But some people just find other methods much neater, don't particularly get on with it. Yeah, depends on the knitter. That's going to be a bit of a theme there, isn't it? So what I said and how I phrased it in the pattern is just to use whichever method you find results in kind of stretchy enough to go over your head, but it's not like super tight, so it doesn't need to have too much stretch. Like a reasonably stretchy but still quite firm and neat edge. And if that is a tubular bind off for you, then go for it. I have a tutorial on my YouTube channel. Or if you prefer to just do a regular 1x1 rib, passing the stitch over, cast off, absolutely fine. That will give you a neater edge than a loose tubular one. So kind of only do it if it's going to be properly firm and snug. Otherwise you get a little bit of a flare out here, which some people found and then undid it. But obviously that's going to apply to any 1x1 rib edge, not specifically this sweater. It's just kind of a point worth noting. So I do find that it can be helpful to try these kind of things on your swatch. Like, it doesn't matter if your swatch has a tubular edge, of course, it's just a swatch, but it can be helpful to give these things a little try out and see how it works in your yarn with your tension. A few people who had used yarns with a bit more drape also found that it worked quite nice to fold the neck under, which I could do that with this, to be honest. Like, just, you know, just doubled it over and folded it inside there, and that worked really nicely in some yarns, so that's obviously an option. And then some people did it much longer and folded over to be like a proper double layer turtleneck. So it was all just, you know, the same starting point, and kind of figure out the neckline that you like best from there using just 1x1 rib. On the topic of yarn choices, so I used dLana Madrilana DK, which I purchased at Barcelona Knits Festival in 2023. And I actually originally bought this yarn for it was going to be my calm down sweater that I made like about a year and a bit ago now, because it was labelled as DK. And I'd felt the swatches and thought it was really nice. And then when I got home and actually swatched it myself, I was like, oh, this is definitely not knitting up as a DK. This is way, way thicker than I expected. So the plan to use it for that sweater went out of the window, and I ended up using Durarum Natura Ulysses for that, which worked perfectly. Similar sort of texture, but just quite a bit finer. So then by that point, I knew that this yarn was labelled as DK, but it was going to have to be something completely different and more of a worsted weight pattern. So saved it for this winter, this autumn winter just going, whenever we are. We're in January now, and cast iron in September. Which obviously meant that the pattern was labelled as, it's a DK yarn, but I'm like, it's not. It's definitely not a DK. It's a worsted weight. So quite a few test knitters actually did use this yarn. It is available in the US and Canada. I bought mine while I was in Spain. It is a Spanish yarn. I bought obviously directly from them. And I bought some more yarn from them, the fingering weight version for a new sweater. But yeah, definitely a worsted weight is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout manner. A few people use like Cascade 220 or Lion Brand Woolies, is it? You know, sort of standard workhorse, readily available worsted weight yarns, and they worked really nicely. A few people used like a sport weight plus mohair or something like that, you know, any combination that knits up to give that sort of gauge, which the gauge worked out as 20.5 stitches to 4 inches, but in the checkerplate stitch. So if it was in just stocking stitch, I think it would probably be about more like 19, just to give you a ballpark kind of idea. Yeah, but I really like these yarns. I would really recommend using quite a grippy wool, but this would also work brilliantly, and a couple of people used like an acrylic, which, as you know, no yarn snobbery from me. Go ahead and use the acrylic. It will actually work out a beautiful sweater that will last really well and can go in the washing machine. So go for it, by all means, absolutely go for it there. Yeah, a few people asked me if it would work to use a regular DK weight. I think obviously because this was labelled as DK, it can be a little bit confusing. And I would say probably not. Just because if you have a looser gauge, which I don't tend to like knitting at a very loose gauge unless it's like sheer mohair or something. I find that I don't like a loose, feels flabby to me, like a loose fabric. I don't really like it. And it's worth considering that if something's a whole garment at a loose gauge, the stitches have got a lot more room to like slide and move against each other, and even more chance of ending up with something that goes basically. And the like crosshatches, texture details won't show up as much. So yeah, probably wouldn't recommend knitting it with a DK at a looser gauge. I probably would use a worsted or a sport plus fluff up, yeah, something like that. Maybe an Aran might work out. It would then be quite dense, so I'd potentially go up a needle size and down a clumbing size, or, you know, a pattern size, which I'm always like, do that with caution. It can be done, but, you know, think about it carefully and about your fabric and your body shape before doing so, but that can work. So yeah, that's the kind of yarns I would recommend. Something a little bit grippy and sticky works brilliantly, but also quite nice, more drapey, fluffy yarn. Actually, one thing to note that one of the test knitters, Steph, kindly mentioned, So she knit hers in Manchalope, a unspun wool yarn. I've not actually used it myself. I've have quite a few skeins of Tlitalope. Mine is like the unspun. Haven't actually used it. So she just gave a few pointers for if anyone was thinking of using an unspun yarn, because it did work out beautifully, but she just had to consider a few things. Firstly, if you're doing any kind of cables or twisted stitches, so this is relevant to any similar sweater, you have to be very careful, because obviously in doing the like swapping around of stitches, you're putting a bit of strain on the yarn there. So which just means that if the yarn is itself very fragile, you have to do that very carefully and maybe a little bit more slowly. She also used a contrast colour around the neck and the cuffs and the hem, which looked lovely. I assumed it was just like a style choice, just to add a little bit of an outline around it, which because it just looked really great. But she actually did that, A, to make it a little bit softer, and B, because doing the tubular edge in an unspun yarn is a nightmare, it just snaps. So she did the edges in something a little bit more robust. And the third point to make that she gave me to pass on was that a split hem in an unspun yarn is a bit dicey. She started doing and then said that even while it was still on the needles, she could see there was a lot of like strain on that one piece. You know, it's a lot of pressure on one little piece of yarn kind of holding it together at the side there. Just a single strand. Maybe if you're holding it with mohair or something, you've added a bit of structure. But just to do a split hem in a single strand of unspun was a bit dicey. So she undid that and just did a regular 1x1 rib all the way around without the split hem. So just worth little few points worth considering them. So on to sizing, one of my favourite topics and something I'm asked about often, both in relation to this pattern and others. So how to choose the best size for yourself or the intended recipient. So in most cases, I advise if you are between sizes to size down for a number of reasons. One being it's often the case that your finished item comes out a little bit looser gauge than the swatch. You know, you can swatch till the cows come home, and then as soon as you get it on the needles making the main item, you realise the swatch told lies. How many times have we said that the swatch has lied to me? It's not what it says it is. And generally that's because A, you'll hold your hands a little bit differently when you're working on a larger stitch count or the whole item, and B, it has then the whole weight of the garment hanging from it. No matter what that is, it's going to be more than a swatch. And we'll stretch out the stitches slightly, so often it will come out a little bit bigger than your swatch anyway. So sometimes if people are between sizes and size up and then it comes out a little bit bigger again, they've kind of gone up a whole size rather than half a size. And another reason that I generally say to err on the smaller size is that it's a lot easier to block something aggressively afterwards than it is to try and shrink it a little bit. So that's generally kind of the main two reasons that I say to size down. But also, it's not, I guess it's not as critical with this one, but in general, I find that this fit around the shoulders is actually kind of the most critical part of the whole item, rather than the bust. And obviously we generally choose sizes based on the bust. But you could have really big boobs and tiny shoulders, or you could have quite small boobs and broader shoulders, and those two people could have the same chest measurement but be completely different frames. So I always say to take into consideration your like general frame size. Like if you have quite narrow shoulders or you're quite a petite person, like if you're only 5 feet tall, then things are often going to maybe look, you know, in general store-bought items, not knitwear specific, things are often going to look quite oversized on you, and therefore you might not want to add to that by choosing a bigger size. I find the same as someone who's quite tall. Trousers or tops or anything often look a little bit short on me, so, you know, more shorter than they're supposed to be. So I don't want things to be too tight, otherwise it just looks like I'm wearing something that's shrunk in the wash or a child's item or something like that. Kind of taking those things into consideration rather than just the bust. Like, is your general frame like quite broad or quite small? Are you tall or short? How do you want this to fit? Like, is the drape of the fabric going to impact that? You know, if something's really drapey, then yeah, it might be okay to have a little bit more ease. But if it's got quite a structured texture and a firm fabric, then you don't necessarily want that, because it'll feel more like you're in a tent if it's too big and too structured. Yeah, there's basically loads of different factors, and I'm forever discussing these things with people in my DMs or in my emails if they've asked, like, oh, what do I do? So for this one, I would probably say if you're between sizes, swatch first. That's always my advice, actually. Choose your size after your swatch, because say the gauge is supposed to be 20.5 stitches, you can try to be as accurate as possible, but chances are it's going to be maybe 20.7 or 20.2 or something like that. You know, we can only be so precise with these things. So I'd say, like, if your swatch is kind of on the looser side, then size down in the pattern. Or if your swatch is kind of on the tight side, size up. And then those things might kind of cancel each other out and end up with something that fits perfectly. So yeah, that might not be the most useful advice, just basically consider 10 million different factors when choosing your size. But hopefully is somewhat helpful. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any more questions about this pattern, please do let me know and I'll answer them in the comments. And yeah, I think this is going to be the first of quite a few textured patterns to come. Let me know if you like this kind of format. I can obviously ramble about this stuff forever in a day. This video is probably far longer than I intended it to be, but I think it might be quite nice to just have a standalone video that would be maybe a nice one to watch whilst you're swatching. Maybe not in this stitch pattern, actually. You might need to have your wits about you a bit more for that. Hopefully this style of video is useful. I've not done it before. Might do it again, might not. Depends whether you guys like it. But yeah, I thought it might be quite handy to see the whole thing and to learn about the thought behind it. So hope you enjoyed. Happy knitting. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see from me, design or video wise, or if you have any comments on this particular one. And now I am off to wear it to go and do a food shop, because I am wearing this to do just about everything in my life right now. So see you later.